My name is David. I am 44 years old and I am an Orthodox Jew. I was born and raised in New York in a family deeply devoted to Torah principles. Since I was a child, I learned that prayer is the foundation of our communion with God. I spent my entire life seeking to understand divine secrets through the teachings of the prophets, studying day and night, fasting, dedicating myself to the precepts of the law. Faith was part of my every breath. It was like I was always trying to prove something, maybe to myself, maybe to God himself, but the truth is, even with all the spiritual knowledge I carried, there was something inside me that remained empty, a silence, a space in my heart that not even the most sincere prayers could fill. I didn't talk about it with anyone. After all, how could a man of faith admit that he felt a spiritual void? It was like a hidden crack in the walls of my soul, small but deep. I prayed every day. I repeated the sacred words with reverence. I bowed my knees before the eternal. I fasted with fervor. But even so, something was still missing, and I didn't know what, until the day came when my life and my faith were abruptly ripped away from me. It was an ordinary morning. I was on my way to synagogue, as I had done for years, with my tallit folded in my arms and my heart focused on meditation. But something strange happened. My body stopped. It just stopped. A sharp pain shot through my chest, and then everything went black. And at that very moment, in that split second between life and death, I discovered that there is a spiritual reality much deeper than I had ever imagined. What I saw, what I heard, what I felt, no rabbi ever told me. No book I studied ever mentioned it. The presence that enveloped me in that place wasn't just light. It was love. It was power. It was true. It was Jesus. Yes, I know the weight that word carries for a Jew. I also resisted, fought, denied it within myself. But when you are enveloped by a presence so divine, so indescribable, everything you thought you knew about God begins to crumble. And not because it was false, but because it was incomplete. Have you ever wondered if there is more than what we have been taught? Have you ever felt deep in your soul that God is trying to show you something? Something that goes beyond the words repeated in prayers. Something alive, real, pulsating. My prayer at that moment was not with words. It was with my soul. It was a cry that did not come out of the mouth, but exploded from the spirit. And that's where it all started. But to understand what really happened on the other side, and what Jesus revealed to me, you need to stay with me, because what comes now is something that can completely transform the way you see faith, God, and eternal life. From a young age, my life was shaped by the traditions of Judaism. I grew up among parchments, prayers, and advice from wise rabbis. Each Friday night, the table set for Shabbat was more than a ritual. It was a spiritual inheritance. The lit candles, the wine, the braided bread, everything carried a sacred symbolism. I saw my father pray with tears in his eyes, my mother singing psalms while lighting the candles, and that inspired me. That was my world. The Torah was my guide, my compass, my identity. For years, I dove deep into the scriptures. I studied ancient Hebrew, memorized the texts of the prophets, debated interpretations with other men of faith. My prayers were constant, meticulous, reverent. I knew every word of Siddur like the back of my hand. He recited the Psalms with a contrite heart. He sought to understand the heart of God through the letter of the law. He fasted, respected the festivals, the customs, every detail of the Jewish tradition. I believed I was walking the path of light, and in many ways I was. But even with so much devotion, there was something that I never had the courage to admit. An emptiness, a silent restlessness that lived inside me. It was as if, even surrounded by wisdom, there was an unanswered question whispering in my silent moments. Sometimes, during late nights of solitary study, when everyone was asleep and I was still staring at the Torah, an inner voice seemed to whisper, "There is more. You haven't seen it all yet." I tried to silence this feeling. I kept repeating to myself, "This is just tiredness, perhaps a spiritual trial." But the deeper I delved into the texts, the more this invisible presence surrounded me. It was like a hunger that couldn't be satisfied. I read about Moses, Elijah, the prophets, men who saw the glory of God face to face, and within me a dangerous desire was born, the desire to not just study about God, but to experience Him. Many nights, after finishing my prayers, I would remain with my eyes closed, just waiting for something to happen, something real. something that filled my soul like no doctrine or tradition ever could. There were times when I would ask God, quietly, almost fearfully, "Why do I feel like I still don't really know you? Where is the fullness of your presence?" Of course, I never shared this with anyone. In my circle, questioning was a sign of spiritual weakness. I was respected, consulted by other brothers, considered a man of solid faith. But inside I was like a deep well with well-built banks, but empty of water. I knew the promises. I knew that the eternal is love, justice, truth. But where was this palpable love? This living presence? Where was the God who spoke to Moses from the bush? Did he still speak? Or had I learned to be content with silence? No matter how much I tried in prayers, fasting, and studies, nothing filled me completely. Religiosity gave me structure. Tradition gave me roots. But my soul cried out for revelation. Not just any revelation, but the deep truth. The truth that transforms the spirit, that fills the void, that turns on the light within. And deep down, even without understanding, I longed for a date. Have you ever felt this? Have you ever been in the midst of faith but wondered why there is still an unfilled space inside you? Have you ever had the feeling that you are close to God, but at the same time, far away, as if there was a missing piece? That's exactly how I felt, and I fought it. I struggled with silence. I struggled with more studying. I fought with more prayers. But that spiritual restlessness wouldn't go away. And the more I tried to ignore it, the more it grew. Until one ordinary day, when, without warning, without a sign, my life was ripped from my body. And there, between the pain and the darkness, I received the answer to everything I was looking for. But be careful. This answer did not come in the way I expected. And maybe you too are about to hear something you never thought possible. Have you ever wondered what exists beyond death? What if everything you believe about the spiritual world is incomplete? What if there is something or someone waiting for you on the other side? Maybe now is the time to find out. It was an ordinary morning. The sky was clear, and the wind blew gently through the neighborhood streets. I was preparing for another day of prayer, as I always did. I put on my tallit with reverence, embraced the Torah with the same respect I had for years, and walked away with a calm heart. It was another Shabbat, another encounter with the presence of the Eternal. At least that's what I believed. I walked with steady steps, mentally reciting the morning blessings. My thoughts were filled with sacred texts. The city seemed to be at peace, but inside, something was beginning to change. Something that not even I myself realized yet. I don't remember exactly when it all started. It was as if the ground moved away from my feet, as if time paused. First, a slight dizziness. Then, pressure in the chest. It was like something was squeezing my heart from the inside. I tried to ignore it. I thought it was just tiredness. I had slept little that night, involved in spiritual reflections, trying to understand why that restlessness wouldn't leave me. But in the following seconds, the pain intensified. It was no longer discomfort. It was like a fire going through my chest. My left arm started to tingle. My breathing became short. And that's when I understood. Something was very wrong. I tried to call for help, but the words wouldn't come out. My vision began to darken at the edges. A buzzing began to fill my ears. I fell to my knees on the floor. People around shouted. Someone ran up to me. A man started shaking my shoulders. They asked me my name, but I could no longer answer. Everything became slow, distorted, as if the world was being sucked away. Amidst the chaos, I heard sirens. A sharp, urgent sound coming towards me. The paramedics arrived quickly. I heard technical voices, quick commands, sounds of equipment being prepared. One hand tugged at my shirt. Another placed something on my chest. I was asked to resist, but I couldn't. My soul no longer fought against my body. I was leaving. And at that moment, something very strange happened. I felt like I was there, but at the same time, I wasn't there anymore. It was as if I had separated from my body. I could see their faces. I could hear the screams. One of the paramedics shouted, "You lost your pulse." Another replied, "Prepare the defibrillator." All of this was happening around me, and yet it seemed so far away. My body was lying on the sidewalk, eyes half closed, the mouth half open, but I was above, observing. And for a brief moment I felt weightless. No pain, no fear, just awareness, a strange consciousness that told me, "You died." Everything went dark. Not an ordinary darkness, but a total absence of sound, color, time. It was absolute silence. A silence that doesn't scare but paralyzes, and it was there in that silence that it all began. But before I continue, I want to ask you something. Do you believe there is something after death? Have you ever wondered what happens when your heart stops beating? Have you ever wondered if your soul goes somewhere, or if everything just ends? Because if you've ever had this question, then perhaps the answer you've been searching for is about to find you. What happened to me at that moment was something that neither medicine nor the religion I knew could explain, and the most impressive thing is who I met when I crossed this invisible border. But this, you will understand in the next step of this journey, and maybe, just like it happened to me, your faith will never be the same again. When everything went dark, I thought it was over. There was no pain, no sounds, no images. It was like being immersed in absolute silence, where time didn't flow and consciousness just existed. I can't say how much time passed there. It could be seconds or centuries, but suddenly something changed. I felt like I was floating, light, free from the weight of the body, free from gravity, free from everything physical. It was as if I were just spirit, just essence. And then a light appeared. At first it seemed distant, but she approached with a softness almost impossible to describe. It was no ordinary light. It was alive. It pulsed. It gave off a vibration that went through everything I was, and the closer I got, the more I felt. But I didn't feel it with the body, because the body was left behind. I felt with my soul, with an awareness I had never experienced before. This light was not blinding. On the contrary, it healed. She involved. She hugged. She spoke, without sound. Each ray seemed to carry a message of peace, of forgiveness, of love. A love that I had never felt before, even with all my life of faith and prayer. It was a love that didn't demand anything, that didn't judge, that didn't ask about what I did or didn't do. He just accepted me. And then he appeared. He didn't walk up to me. He was simply there, as if it always had been, as if my soul already knew. I recognized him before I even saw him clearly. It was a presence so intense, so powerful, so absolutely real, that my entire being folded before it without me needing to move. It was as if my spirit knew exactly what to do. Silence, surrender, just be. He looked at me, and in that look, I saw everything. I saw who I was, who I had been, and who I could be. But there was no conviction. There was no disapproval. Just a look so full of love that it completely disarmed me. And then he spoke, and each word didn't just enter my mind. It reverberated through me, as if my own DNA was listening. You already know me, even if you don't know it. At that moment, an avalanche of spiritual memories invaded my consciousness. It was as if, for a moment, my entire history with God became clear. I understood that he was always there, in my silent questions, in the early mornings when my soul cried, in the verses of the Torah that I did not fully understand, in the hunger that was eating me up inside. It was him. It was always him. Even when I didn't know it, even when I called him by another name, even when I thought I was alone. That being before me was Jesus, and that tore me up inside. Because as a Jew, that was the presence I was taught not to accept, to reject. But there, in front of the absolute truth, nothing else mattered. No doctrine, no tradition, no argument, just love. And his love was so deep, so welcoming, so immense, that it made me understand that everything I was looking for, all my prayers, fasting, studies, sleepless nights, was my soul crying out for this encounter. He didn't come to condemn me. He did not come to point out mistakes nor demand forced repentance. He simply reminded me of who I was. He said, "You were always mine, since before time, since before pain, since before fear. You forgot, but I never forgot you." And in that moment I cried. Not with tears, but with my essence. It was as if my entire soul was melting into love, a love that cleansed, that healed, that restored. I saw myself as a son who returns home after a long time in the dark. And he just opened his arms. I didn't want to go back. I didn't want to leave that place because for the first time in my life, I was whole. It was complete. The search was over. The thirst had been quenched. The doubt dissolved. There was no longer fear of death, no guilt, no judgment, just peace, a peace that passes all understanding. But what happened next was even more impressive. Do you believe that a single sentence can change your entire life? Do you believe that a presence can rewrite the story of your soul? So get ready, because what happened next goes beyond anything I imagined. And maybe you're about to change your life too. It all happened so fast, and at the same time, it felt like I had lived in that place for an eternity. As the light began to dissolve around me, I felt something that ripped me apart inside. It was like I was being pulled away from the presence that finally made me feel whole. I didn't want to go back. My soul resisted, but there was something stronger than my will, something that seemed to call me back urgently. And then, in the blink of an eye, I was thrown back into the weight of the world. I felt like I was thrown into a dark, cramped cave. My body felt cold, heavy, rigid. The sounds came back little by little, as if they were coming from underwater. Screams, noise from appliances, agitated voices. Someone said my name. Another person exclaimed, "He's back! We have a pulse! He's back!" And then, with a sharp pain in my chest, I desperately sucked in air as if I had been born again. In fact, that was exactly it. I had been born again, but no one there knew what had really happened to me. They took me to the hospital by ambulance. The doctors looked at me as if they were seeing a mystery. "You were clinically dead for several minutes," they told me. It was a miracle. They repeated this word as if trying to make sense of what they witnessed. But no matter how much science tried to understand, not even they could imagine what had happened on the other side. Nor did they know what their eyes could not see. In the hospital, between tubes, monitors, and accelerated heartbeats, my body began to react. But my soul, it was no longer the same. Everything was different. I saw things more clearly. I heard voices and felt vibrations that had previously gone unnoticed. It was as if my perception had been expanded, as if the spirit's eyes were finally open. And that was when the real conflict began. Because on the outside, I was the same man, Orthodox Jew, respected by the community, a Torah scholar. But inside, I carried a revelation that no rabbi had ever taught me. Something that defies traditions, something that breaks with everything I was told, was the absolute truth. I knew what I had experienced. I knew who had greeted me on the other side. I knew who had spoken to me, but how to tell this to the world? In the days that followed, while I was recovering physically, my spirit was at war. I listened to the advice of doctors, family, friends, everyone trying to console me, saying that I had just been delirious because of the cardiac arrest. Others said it was just his brain collapsing. But how can I explain the love I felt? How can I explain the look that penetrated the depths of my soul? How can I deny the most real presence I have ever experienced? I wanted to scream, I wanted to tell, I wanted to share, but something held me back. The fear of losing everything, my family, my friends, my position, my religious identity, and above all the fear of being ridiculed, of being called a traitor, because the name that was revealed to me was the name that our tradition rejects. Jesus. That name now burned inside me like fire, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. But I also didn't know how to accept it. I was still Jewish. I still loved my people, my culture, my history. I didn't want to give up any of that. But how can I reconcile what I saw with what I have been taught my entire life? The nights were long. I cried in silence. I prayed like never before. Not with the words I learned, but with deep groans, with formless pleas. He cried out to the God of Israel, "What do you want from me now? Why me? Why have you shown me what no one will believe?" And then, a strange feeling started to grow inside me. It wasn't fear, it was a calling, a soft but firm call. Something inside me said that this wasn't just for me, that this experience was not just a personal revelation, but a purpose, a mission. And that idea terrified me. Because mission requires courage. Mission requires sacrifice, and I didn't know if I was ready for that. Have you ever felt like you carry something so big inside of you that you can no longer keep it silent? Have you ever lived through a time when the fear of speaking the truth fights against the weight of hiding it? Because that's exactly how I felt, torn between two worlds, trapped between the tradition that formed me and the revelation that set me free. But what happened next was what led me to make the most difficult decision of my life, and perhaps in that same decision is now before you. There were days of anguish, of profound silence, of conversations that only happened between me and God. I felt like I was carrying a bomb inside my chest, something that needed to be said, but I still didn't know how. It was like walking on broken glass. With each step, a piece of my old life seemed to break away, but I knew I couldn't hide it anymore. So I decided to start with my family. After all, if there was anyone who could try to understand me, it would be them. I called my parents to talk. My parents have always been my base, my spiritual fortress. I grew up watching my father study the Torah with tireless dedication, and my mother pray with tears in her eyes. I loved them deeply, and part of me still had this childish hope that they would somehow feel what I felt. That maybe when they heard my experience, something inside them would open. Something would touch their hearts the same way it touched mine. But that's not what happened. They listened to me carefully at first. They looked at me with that paternal love that calms, but also with a growing concern in their eyes. When I mentioned the light, the feeling of peace, the out-of-body awareness, they nodded, still trying to keep up. But when I finally uttered the name that had been revealed to me, the name that now burned like fire within my soul, Jesus, it was as if the air had been ripped from the room. My mother put her hand over her mouth, shocked. My father remained completely silent. His look changed, not out of anger, but disappointment, of deep confusion, as if I had betrayed not just our faith, but our history, our identity, our lineage. I tried to explain. I tried to say that I wasn't abandoning anything, that my faith in the God of Israel was still alive, even stronger, that I had not changed my religion, but had received a revelation, that it was the same God, only closer, more real, more alive, but they couldn't hear. My father stood up from his chair and said, "You're confused. It was the pain. It was the trauma. Maybe you need help." My mother cried. I cried too, because at that moment, I realized that something had broken, not out of hate, but out of fear, a deep fear of the unknown, a fear of what you cannot control, a fear of everything that destabilizes the faith built on decades of tradition. So I decided to look for the rabbi. I thought maybe, with all his wisdom, he could understand, that he would see in my story an echo of the scriptures. After all, how many prophets did not have supernatural encounters? How many mystical stories are there among our own people? So I told him everything. From the moment I fell, to the light, to the voice, to the name. The rabbi looked at me for long seconds. Then he sighed deeply and said, "David, what you went through was real, but the enemy is cunning. He can disguise himself as light. He needs to be discerning." I understood what he meant. He thought I had been tricked. That light was an illusion. That voice was a trap. But how can I explain that if that was a lie, then I never experienced the truth? I came home feeling like I was alone in the world. I was not persecuted. I was not harassed. But I was silenced. Looks that were once of admiration now carried pity. Whispers began to emerge among acquaintances. They said I had lost it, that he had gone crazy because of the fright, that he was spiritually vulnerable. But what no one understood was that I was more aware than ever. My own community said I was delusional, but something inside me wouldn't let me shut up. It was like a constant voice, soft but firm, repeating, "You saw, you know. Now it is your responsibility to speak." I didn't know how. I didn't know when. But I knew I couldn't hide anymore. And if you've ever been through something that no one believed in, you understand. If you've ever seen something that others called crazy, but deep down in your spirit, you knew was real, then maybe you've heard that voice too, that calling. Because deep down, the truth doesn't need applause. It just needs to be said. But what happens when this truth starts to touch other people? When does what you saw start to awaken hearts? When silence is no longer an option? What happened next was just the beginning of something much bigger. Have you ever felt like something is calling you, even when everything and everyone tells you to shut up? So get ready, because maybe this call is for you too. I resisted as long as I could. The voice inside me was not silent, but the fear still held me back. Every time I thought about speaking, something blocked me. Judgment, rejection, the crazy label. I remembered the looks from my parents, the rabbi, the childhood friends who avoided me. But the strongest memory wasn't of those reactions. It was of the light, from his gaze, the love that enveloped me like no words could ever describe. And that memory was alive, pulsating. I could feel it, even awake, even days later. And it was this presence that drove me. that pushed me gently but also urgently. It was then that I understood. This wasn't just an experience. It was a calling, a purpose, and I knew, if I stayed silent, something inside me would die. Something essential. Something that had been reborn when I returned from that place. I couldn't pretend anymore. I could no longer bear to see people seeking meaning in religion, while I knew that the truth was beyond the walls that tradition had erected. A living truth, incarnate, what speaks, who loves, who forgives. I decided that my mission was to tell, even if they called me crazy, even if I lost everything, because, after all, what I had seen was bigger than reputation, bigger than fear, bigger than logic. It was the very manifestation of God's love, and I could no longer hide it from the world. I remember the first time I pressed the record button. It was just me, my cell phone, and a trembling heart. I didn't know what to say, so I just closed my eyes and spoke as if I was praying. I told my story without a script, without trying to convince anyone. I just shared what I saw, what I felt, and how that experience had changed everything inside me. I uploaded the video to the channel I created silently, with the most neutral name I could think of, just to avoid attracting unwanted attention, and I waited. In the first few days, almost no one watched. But then, something started to happen. Discreet comments, people saying I felt the same way. Others saying this touched my soul, and then one specific comment broke me. I'm Jewish. I saw the same light, and I never told anyone. This comment opened a new universe within me. I was not alone. He wasn't the only one. There were others, people from different backgrounds, beliefs, places, who had had similar experiences, but who, out of fear, guilt, or shame, had never spoken out. And now, they were finding courage through my story. I started receiving private messages, testimonials, transformed lives, people who dreamed of Jesus, others who went through cardiac arrest and came back talking about the same light, the same look, the same voice. It was as if an invisible thread began to connect these souls across the world, as if we were being awakened by him. A small group was then formed. We were not a sect nor a church. We were just seekers, survivors, travelers between two worlds, souls who, for some reason, were called to see what is on the other side and return. And within this group, his presence was constant. We prayed together. We shared visions. Some still carried fear. Others, like me, were just beginning to understand the scope of the mission. But there was one certainty that united us. That was not imagination. It was real. More real than anything we touch with our hands. Many in the group had also been raised in religious homes. Jews, Catholics, spiritualists, even atheists. But everyone had seen the same thing. The same light. The same presence. And they had all heard, somehow, the same call. Come back and tell. Each meeting, each prayer, each new report was like a breath of confirmation. God was doing something big, and somehow he had decided to use precisely my pain, my rupture, my story, to start this. And even today, I can barely understand why. But I learned that I don't need to understand everything. I just need to obey. Maybe now you're wondering if this could be happening to you too. Maybe you felt something. Maybe he had dreams, sensations, intuitions that seemed out of the ordinary. Maybe you heard your name in the silence or felt a sudden peace for no reason, and he was afraid of speaking, of seeming crazy, of being rejected. But what if this is the beginning of your calling? What if the same voice that called me is calling you now? What happened next was something not even I was prepared to face. I don't know who's listening to this right now, but if my story reached you, maybe it's not by chance. Because I believe that God continues to speak, he continues to reveal himself, and sometimes he uses stories like this to touch those who are tired of looking for answers in places where they only find silence. Sometimes he uses pain, loss, confusion, even death to show us life. But not just any life, the real life. The life that is born from the Spirit. The life that begins when we stop just believing in something and start getting to know someone. For years, I lived like someone walking down a dark corridor, holding a sacred book in their hand, but without knowing that the door was open the whole time, and that the one who wrote this book was there, waiting for me, with open arms. Jesus was not an idea I was convinced to accept. He was a presence that loved me before I even knew what love was. He found me between life and death. He gave it back to me when I was already gone, and he reminded me, with a look that pierces the soul, that I was never alone. The truth is, you never were either. Even when everything seemed lost, even when your prayers seemed to hit the ceiling and fall to the floor, even when you thought you were worthless, that it was too late, that your story was already written, he was there, waiting for you to look inside, waiting for your spirit to say yes, without needing to understand everything with your mind. You don't need to know all the verses. You don't need to belong to a religious system. You don't need to understand the sky, nor decipher the mysteries of the universe. All you need is to let the light in. The light that touched me wants to touch you now. If you felt something different listening to this, don't ignore it, because I wasn't the one who spoke to you, it was him. And it's not about me, not even about my story. It's about what he wants to do in your life. Do you feel that weight in your chest right now? An urge to cry without knowing why? A mix of peace and chills, that warmth in your heart, that desire to throw yourself into the arms of someone who understands you even when no one else does? This has a name. This has its origins. It is his spirit. It's his calling. You can resist as I resisted. You can try to understand with logic, with religion, with reason. But there will come a time when you will realize it's not about understanding. It's about surrendering. And in that moment, everything changes. The void disappears. The pain stops. The soul rests. And for the first time, you feel like you're in the right place, at the right time, on the right plane, because you're with the right person. You can continue watching this video as someone who just consumes content, or you can listen to this story like someone receiving an invitation, because that's what she is, an invitation. The same voice that called me now calls you, and she says, I'm here, I'm real, I love you, and I wait for you. If this story touched your heart in any way, if at any point you felt something different, like a warmth in your chest, a strange peace, or that urge to cry for no reason, so I ask you, don't keep this to yourself. Share. Comment below with the phrase, I receive this truth. Leave in the comments what you felt. Tell me your story. Tell me if you've ever been through something similar, because maybe what you experienced, or are going to experience, is the next testimony the world needs to hear. This channel is not about me. Today it's about what no one dares to say, that Jesus is alive, that he continues to appear, and that life after death is more real than anything we can see. So if you felt this, if you identified, if you want to continue on this journey with me, sign up now. Activate the bell, like this video. But more important than all that, close your eyes and talk to him, now, in silence, your way, no fear, shameless. And if you know someone who needs to hear this message, send them this video. Perhaps this is exactly what this person's soul has been waiting for years, because what I experienced could be just the beginning of what God wants to do in us. If something inside you was touched today, then you can't stop here. Click on the next video that is now appearing on your screen. There's something there that you need to hear, and perhaps, without knowing it, your soul is already feeling it. Move on, because what comes next might be exactly what you've been looking for a long time.